The sun was merciless, pressed down on the earth as if it wished to burn everything beneath it to ash. Heat shimmered above the wide green leaves of the banana trees, heavy with fruit that bent their stems low. The plantation stretched as far as Amari's eyes could see, row upon row of trees, the air thick with the damp, clinging smell of sap, sweat, and rot. Amari bent low, his hands gripping the machete. His palms were raw from years of cutting, the calluses cracked and bleeding. Each swing sent a dull throb up his arms, but he did not pause. To pause meant a whip. To falter meant pain. Faster. The overseer's voice tore through the air, followed by the sharp crack of leather. Amari flinched, though the lash did not strike him this time. He turned his head slightly and saw it land across another man's back, a boy no older than 16. The boy gasped, his knees nearly buckling, but he straightened and raised his machete again. His silence was his only shield. Amari forced himself back into rhythm. Swing, cut, step forward, swing again. The sun beat down on his bent neck. Sweat ran into his eyes, stinging, but he dared not stop to wipe it away. All around him, the others worked in the same silence. Women with hollow eyes, men with scarred backs, even children, struggling under bunches of bananas heavier than their thin bodies. A girl stumbled in the row ahead, dropping her load. An overseer strode over, whip in hand, shouting words Amari could not afford to hear. He only listened to the sound that followed, the sound of leather striking flesh. Once, twice, until the girl staggered upright again and picked up her burden. The plantation was a world without mercy. Amari's thoughts wandered, though he tried to hold them back. Memory was dangerous here, but memory crept in all the same. He thought of his mother's voice, soft and low, singing to him at night when he was a child. He thought of his father's strong hands guiding him through the fields back in his homeland, where the soil was dark and rich, where work had been hard, but never cruel. Those memories flickered like distant stars, faint and fading, till the whip cracked nearby and scattered them again. It had been 6 years since he had been stolen from that life. 6 years on Senor Valverde's plantation. 6 years of labor. From dawn until the night swallowed the sky, of sleeping in the cramped, foul barracks with bodies pressed close. Of waking each morning to the same endless rows of banana trees. 6 years of scars, layering over scars. Valverde himself rarely walked the fields. He preferred to stay in his grand house on the hill, with polished windows that caught the sun and gleamed like gold. But his presence was always felt. The overseers acted in his name, his shadow stretching long across every worker's bent back. His orders came in the snap of whips, in the silence demanded, in the weight of exhaustion that crushed every soul here. Amari straightened for half a moment too long, his back aching. "Down, boy!" The overseer's shout froze him. He dropped, his gaze bent again, jaw clenched tight. He did not answer. To answer would only bring more pain. Silence was not weakness, it was survival. The hours bled together, measured not by clocks, but by sweat and lashes. The sun slid lower, turning the sky a bruised orange. Still they worked, because work ended only when the overseers allowed it. Only when the baskets were full and the fruit was ready for the riverboats that carried wealth away for others to enjoy. At last, the call came to stop. Amari's muscles trembled as he dragged himself out of the rows, his body one long ache. He carried the machete back to the shed, placing it with the others, his hands shaking from exhaustion. Around him, the others moved like shadows, silent and beaten, their steps heavy, their heads bowed. They shuffled toward the barracks along. Low building with walls that trapped heat and air that stank of mildew and bodies. Inside, there was no space, only crowded wooden planks to sleep on, no comfort, no peace. Amari lay down, his back pressed against rough wood, his chest heaving. The sounds of the others filled the dark, coughing, quiet sobs, the shuffle of feet settling into place. But beneath it all, in his chest, something burned still. The plantation had taken his freedom. It had taken his family. It had tried, day after day, to take his will. But it had not yet taken his soul. And though Amari said nothing, though he showed nothing, Though the overseers saw only another broken man inside him, the fire lived on. The morning began before the sun had risen. As it always did, a horn's hollow cry cut through the barracks, pulling Amari from the thin, restless sleep that never refreshed him. Around him, bodies stirred, groaned, and rose in silence. Some clutched their ribs from beatings, others limped from injuries that had never healed, yet none lingered. Lash to be late meant the lash. To resist meant death. Amari stood slowly, every joint stiff, his back sore from the wooden plank that served as a bed. He tied the ragged strip of cloth around his waist, the only clothing left to him after years of labor. His scars itched in. The cool morning air welts raised from punishments past. He rubbed his palms together. The skin cracked from machete handles and rope burns. The overseers were waiting outside. Torches in hand, their shadows stretched long across the dirt. Their boots were polished, their eyes sharp, their whips coiled like snakes. They herded the slaves like cattle, barking orders that split the quiet dawn. Move faster, line up, eyes down. Amari kept his gaze low, his heart steady. He had learned to hide everything, his anger, his fear, his thoughts. To show anything was to give them power. The walk to the fields was short, but felt endless. The banana trees loomed ahead, rows upon rows fading into mist, their leaves slick with dew. As the sun broke over the horizon, its light caught the overseers. Whips, making the leather gleam. Work began. Machetes rose and fell. Bananas were cut, gathered, carried 2 baskets. The rhythm was merciless, a cycle without end. It happened mid-morning. Amari's body was tired, his swing slowing, his vision blurred with sweat. His grip loosened just enough for the overseer to notice. Lazy dog? The shout froze him. He turned slightly, just as Rojas, the broad-shouldered overseer with the cruelest hand, strode toward him. Whip uncoiled in his fist. Amari straightened instinctively. I had the first lash struck before the word left his lips. Fire ripped across his back, searing flesh. He staggered forward, his knees nearly buckling. A gasp escaped him, but he swallowed the cry. Another lash, then another. Each one tore his skin, each one louder than words. The sound echoed through the rows, sharp, final, a language every slave understood. The overseer's face twisted in fury, as though Amari's silence insulted him. On your knees. Amari sank down, not out of obedience, but because his legs no longer held him. His eyes stayed fixed on the dirt. The earth smelled of sap and blood. The overseer circled him, the whip whistling through the air. You think you can defy me? You think you can rest while others work? The lash cracked again. Amari clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He would not give Rojas the sound of his scream. Around him, the others kept working, eyes averted. To look too long was to invite punishment. But Amari felt them near, their silence heavy with shared pain. A hand brushed his shoulder lightly as the overseer stepped away. It was Mateo. His friend's whisper reached his ear. Hold on, brother. Do not let them see you fall inside. Amari nodded faintly, though the blood running down his back made him sway. He pressed his palm into the dirt, steadying himself, then forced himself upright again. His body burned, but he raised the machete once more. Rojas spat in the dirt. Work, dog, until your bones break. The whip coiled back at his side as he walked away. But the sound of it lingered. The sound of the lash had spoken louder than any words. It was the overseer's voice, the master's tongue, the law of the land. And though Amari's back bled, though his strength trembled, he held his silence. He had given them his body, but not his dignity. That he would guard until his last breath. As the sun climbed higher, the work went on. The fields rustled with the sound of leaves and machetes. But beneath it all, Amari heard only the whip's voice and his own vow, whispered inside, never to let it claim his soul. The sun hung high, a white fire burning against the pale blue sky. Its heat clung to everything, making the air heavy, smothering, endless. The banana trees, with their broad leaves and drooping stems, offered no real shelter. they were not shade, but burden, for their fruit was the weight that bent every back. Amari's muscles throbbed from the whipping the day before.
Right.
Each movement pulled at the fresh wounds across his back, reopening them. His shirt, nothing more than a ragged scrap of cloth stuck to his skin, damp with blood and sweat. Every swing of the machete was a battle, but he swung anyway. To stop was to invite more pain. To falter was to die. The overseers prowled the rows like wolves. Rojas's whip snapped the air, striking not because it had to, but because it could. Another man, Ortega, carried a cane he used to jab ribs, smack jaws, knock baskets over so slaves were forced to pick them up again. The overseers laughed at the smallest stumble, feeding on cruelty as though it were wine. Amari's eyes caught on a girl, no older than 12, her frame thin, her arms trembling beneath the cluster of bananas strapped across her back. The load dragged her to her knees. She tried to rise, gasping, her legs shaking, but the fruit was too heavy. Ortega was there in an instant. His cane struck her across the shoulders. Up, rat. Duh. The girl whimpered, but tried again. Her body buckled. The cane came down harder. Amari felt the rage flare hot inside him, his hands clenched around the machete. For a heartbeat, he imagined swinging it not at the bananas, but at Ortega's skull. But Mateo's voice cut through the storm. "Steady, brother," he whispered from the row beside him. "Steady." Amari forced the thought down. To act would mean death. Not just for him, but for anyone seen helping him. He turned slightly, waiting until Ortega's gaze shifted, then slid closer to the girl. As she tried again to rise, he slipped his hand beneath her bundle, lifting just enough to take some of the weight. She rose, staggering forward, eyes wide with silent gratitude. Amari gave no sign, no smile, only bent back to his work. But inside something burned stronger. Even here in this place of chains, he could still choose small acts of defiance, acts of humanity. The day dragged on. The soil beneath their feet turned dark with sweat and drops of blood, staining it deeper. With every passing hour, Amari thought of how the bananas thrived, fat and sweet, while the people who harvested them shriveled and broke. It was as though the earth itself fed on suffering. Near midday, Valverde himself arrived. His horse's hooves crushed the dirt. Path as he rode between the rows. His boots gleamed, his coat crisp, his face shaded by a wide hat. He did not dismount, did not greet. He simply looked, his eyes sharp, cold, full of ownership. The overseer straightened when he passed. Rojas bowed his head slightly. Ortega puffed his chest. Valverde's gaze slid over the workers like one might look at cattle, smiled faintly at the baskets full of bananas, the trees bending with fruit. His fortune was ripe. Amari's jaw tightened. His hands shook on the machete's handle. He did not lift his head. He did not let his anger show. But inside him, his thoughts roared. One day this soil will drink his blood, too. Valverde tugged his reins, turned his horse, and rode. Back toward his house on the hill, the overseers watched him go, then snapped their whips harder, as if to remind the slaves who they truly belonged to. By the time the sun dipped low, the baskets overflowed, and the workers were bent nearly double with exhaustion. Their feet dragged through the dirt. The girl with the bundle walked ahead of Amari, her knees trembling with every step. But she did not fall again. The plantation slept that night beneath a blood-red sky, and though Amari's body screamed with pain, his mind clung to the memory of that small act, his hand beneath the girl's burden. The overseers thought the soil was fed only by whips and fear. But Amari knew another truth. Blood could carry seeds of defiance, and one day those seeds might grow. The night had been short, restless. Amari's back burned with every shift against the wooden planks of the barracks. He drifted in and out of shallow dreams, fragments of memory breaking the surface like waves. He was a boy again, barefoot in the red soil of his homeland. His mother's voice hummed through the evening, a lullaby about the ancestors and the river that carried souls to the stars. His father's laughter echoed in the fields, the smell of roasted maize clinging to the night air. The memory was soft, warm, almost reliant, till a boot struck his ribs. Up, dog. Amari's eyes flew open. The barracks came back into focus. The damp wood. The groans of the waking. The guards' torches casting harsh shadows. The dream was gone, but its ache remained, lodged in his chest like a stone. The march to the fields began. Their bodies shuffled in silence, broken shapes in the pale light of dawn. Every step carried the weight of yesterday's pain and the certainty of today's labor. By midday, Amari's body trembled from exhaustion. His wounds reopened beneath his shirt, sticky against his skin. The swing of the machete felt heavier than the last. But memory lingered. His mother's song haunted him, twisting into something sharper, more urgent. It was both comfort and torment, a reminder of what had been taken from him and what still lived in him. In the afternoon, a rare moment of pause came when baskets were shifted toward the river path. Amari leaned briefly against a tree, his breath ragged beside him. Alina, the older woman with streaks of silver in her hair, came closer. Her eyes held a tired kindness. "You dream of home?" she whispered. Amari's gaze flickered to hers. "You can tell?" Alina nodded. "We all do. It is how we survive." The body can be broken, but the memory keeps burning like a coal. It hurts, but it also warms. For a moment, the plantation noise dulled the overseer's shouts, the thud of machetes, the rustle of leaves. In its place was Elena's low voice, carrying the rhythm of something older than chains. "You are not alone," she said. "Never alone. They can tear us apart, but we are still bound to our ancestors, to each other." Amari swallowed hard, words lodged in his throat. He nodded once. That ember in his chest glowed brighter, even through the pain, but the moment shattered before it could grow. A commotion rose near the edge of the field. An overseer dragged a man forward, a slave accused of stealing bananas. His face was gaunt, his hands trembling. His eyes wide with terror. Valverde himself had come down, his boots shining in the dirt. His expression was calm, too calm. He nodded once to Rojas. The whip lashed out, sharp and brutal. The man screamed, stumbled and fell. Again, the lash tore flesh. And again. The air filled with the sound of punishment, the overseer's shouts, the desperate cries of a man whose body could no longer endure. Amari's stomach twisted. He forced himself to look away, but the sound carved itself into his bones. When silence came, it was heavier than the lashes had been. The man's body lay still in the dirt, a warning written in blood. The slaves bent their heads and returned to work. No one spoke. No one dared. But that night in the barracks, Amari stared at the ceiling beams until his vision blurred. Elena's words returned. The body can be broken, but the memory keeps burning. He closed his eyes and whispered his mother's lullaby under his breath, soft enough that only he could hear. It hurt. It comforted. Reminded him that though the plantation tried to strip away everything, ashes of memory still glowed inside him, ashes that could not be extinguished. The morning air was thick with mist when the overseers ordered a group of workers to load baskets for the river. Amari was among them. His back ached from the previous day's lashings, but he shouldered the task without a word. He was used to the ache now. It lived in him like a second skin. The path to the river cut through the plantation, lined with banana trees heavy with fruit. Each worker carried a load strapped to their back, clusters of bananas so heavy they made their knees shake. The overseers walked alongside, boots crunching the dirt, whips dangling at their sides like threats waiting to be spoken. As the group reached the riverbank, the sound of water filled the air, a soft rushing, endless and steady. The river was wide, its surface catching the light of the rising sun. Boats waited there, their decks piled high with crates. Crews shouting in Spanish as they prepared to haul the fruit downstream to the coast. Amari paused as his load was taken. He stared at the water, its surface rippling, free and untouchable. It carried everything it touched, flowing past the plantation, past the overseers, past even Valverde's estate. It moved on, unchained, unbroken. The contrast struck him with a force sharper than the whip. He felt the ache of longing so strong it hollowed his chest. If he could only slip into that current, if he could only let it carry him away. But he knew the guards watched closely. The river was freedom, and freedom was death. Mateo came up beside him, his face slick with sweat, his eyes fixed forward. As they straightened after unloading, Mateo leaned close and whispered, "One day, brother, one day we walk away from here." Amari glanced at him sharply, fear flashing in his eyes. Even whispers of escape were dangerous. The overseers claimed that those who tried to run were torn apart by dogs, their bodies dragged back as warnings. Some said they were burned alive. The truth hardly mattered. The fear was enough still. Amari could not silence the thought. Current, smooth and endless, seemed to call to him louder than any lash. He imagined stepping into it, imagined it carrying him beyond the horizon. Imagined the sun warming his skin without overseers watching. "Quiet," he hissed back to Mateo, though his voice trembled. "Quiet, or you'll kill us both." Mateo's eyes held something that was not quite defiance, not quite hope, but something in between. "Then let them kill me. Better than living like this." The overseers barked orders, breaking their moment. The workers bent again, lifting new loads. The march back to the fields began, but Amari's steps felt heavier now, his mind filled with the image of the water moving free while he was trapped in rows of green. That night, he lay awake in the barracks, staring at the cracks in the wooden ceiling. He heard the others shift, cough, weep softly into the dark. He heard the guards outside, their boots crunching, the distant bark of dogs. But beneath it all, in his memory, he heard the river, the soft, steady rush of water moving where it pleased. It was silent compared to the overseer's whips, silent compared to Valverde's voice, but it spoke to him in a way nothing else. The river's silence was not absence, was promise, and Amari knew he would never forget it. Night fell heavy on the plantation, but darkness brought no peace. The barracks were packed tight, the air thick with sweat and mildew. The wooden walls trapped the heat of the day, turning the room into a suffocating box. Bodies shifted restlessly, coughing, moaning, some weeping quietly into their arms. Pain did not end when the sun went down. It only changed shape. Amari lay on his plank, staring into the dark. His back throbbed, each breath sending sparks of pain through the lashes that had not healed. Sleep would not come. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the whip snapping, saw the man's execution in the field, saw the river flowing free while his own chains dug deeper. The silence was broken by a cry. A boy, no, more than 8, was dragged from his space by an overseer who had slipped into the barracks unannounced. The boy's mother begged, clutching at the guard's arm, but a boot shoved her aside. His cries carried into the night, sharp and terrified. Amari sat up, his fists clenched, his chest burned with rage, so hot he thought he might choke on it. He started to rise, but Mateo's hand pressed hard against his shoulder. "No, Mateo," whispered urgently. His eyes were wide, his face set in fear. "Don't, brother. Oh, they'll kill you. They'll kill us all." Amari froze, trembling. His body screamed to act, but Mateo's grip was unyielding. Outside, the boy's cries cut off into silence to final. The barracks grew heavy again, every breath thick with grief. No one spoke. To speak would be to acknowledge the horror. to risk drawing the overseer's attention. Amari lowered himself slowly, his heart pounding. His jaw ached from the force of his clenched teeth. Mateo leaned closer, his voice low. "They want us broken. That's why they come at night. Fear doesn't sleep." Amari said nothing, but the words cut deep. He understood. Night was no escape. Even dreams were poisoned. Yet amid the suffocating fear, there were fragments of resistance. In the corner, Alina began to hum a soft, trembling sound, almost too quiet to hear. The melody was old, carrying the weight of generations, a song. Whispered from mother to child, a reminder of humanity in a place built to strip it away. One by one, others joined in. Low voices, barely above breath, weaving together. Not loud enough for the guards outside to hear, but enough for those within to feel. Amari closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. For a moment, the weight lifted, not gone, but lighter. The chains still cut into his wrists. The lashes still burned across his back, but the song stitched something inside him that had begun to fray. The night pressed on. The overseers patrolled outside, boots crunching, dogs growling, their shadows slipping through cracks in the barracks walls. But inside, in whispers and in song, the slaves held each other up. Amari drifted at last into sleep, not peaceful, not free from nightmares, but filled with the quiet hum of voices refusing to die. Out the plantation ruled their days. But the night, heavy as it was, still carried fragments of defiance weight they bore together. The rains had come, turning the plantation into a swamp of mud and rot. The air smelled of wet earth, of decay, of sweat that never dried. Work did not stop. Work never stopped. Amari stumbled under the weight of the banana stalk strapped to his back. The load was heavier than usual, soaked with rain, each step sinking into the mud. His body screamed for relief. His shoulders burned. His legs shook. Behind him, an overseer's voice snapped like a whip. "Faster, dog." Amari clenched his teeth and pushed forward, but his flesh had limits. His foot caught in the mud. His knees buckled, and he fell hard into the dirt. The weight crushed him, driving his face into the ground. For a moment, all he tasted was mud and blood where his lips split. Laughter followed the overseer's cruel delight. Boots splashed closer. Then came the real whip, searing across Amari's back. Once, twice. Again he gasped, but no cry escaped. His pride would not allow it. He gritted his teeth against the agony, refusing the overseer that satisfaction. "Get up," the man barked. "Another lash, up, dog, or you'll drown in the mud." Amari's body would not obey. His arms trembled. His knees slid. He felt Mateo's hand suddenly at his side, trying to help lift the load. "Leave him," the overseer roared. Mateo froze, his face stricken. The whip struck him too, a warning to any who dared help. He staggered back, clutching his arm. Amari was alone again. His muscles screamed rebellion. His body had betrayed him, strength stolen, resolve buried in the mud. He wanted to rise, but nothing remained. The overseer leaned close, his breath hot with rum. "You think you're strong, boy? You're nothing, less than nothing. I own you. Even your body won't fight for you." Another lash. Amari's vision blurred. Thought of the river, of the silence that promised freedom. He thought of his mother's face, blurred by memory, but burning with dignity. Something inside him whispered, "Not yet." With a growl that was half pain, half fury, he forced his body upward. The load pressed into him, but somehow he rose, his legs trembling like reeds in wind. The overseer sneered, but stepped back, satisfied enough. Amari staggered forward, dragging the weight through the mud. His flesh had betrayed him, but his will had not. That night, in the barracks, Mateo pressed a damp cloth to Amari's torn back. The pain was unbearable, but Amari's eyes were steady. "They think we're broken," he whispered, voice raw. "But as long as I can rise, I'm not." Mateo's hand shook as he nodded. One day he said again, though this time it carried not hope, but a vow. Outside, the rain fell hard, beating against the roof like drums. The mud would claim them again tomorrow. Their bodies would fail again and again. But in that moment, Amari knew his spirit had not surrendered. Not. Yet, the morning rose red, the sky painted with the color of blood. The plantation stirred awake, but the air was heavier than usual, as if the earth itself carried sorrow. Amari knew why. The night before, Mateo had whispered his decision. He would not endure another season. He would run into the jungle, toward the river, toward anything but chains. Amari had begged him to wait, to think. But Mateo's eyes had burned with a fire that would not be cooled. Now, as they trudged into the fields, Amari felt dread knotting his stomach. He carried his load, his body weak, his back raw from lashings, but his mind was fixed on his friend. Mateo walked ahead, silent, shoulders squared as though he had already chosen his fate. The overseers barked orders. The sun climbed higher. The air grew thick with heat. Then, in a single heartbeat, it happened. Mateo dropped his load. The fruit splattered into the dirt. He ran through the rows of banana trees, legs pumping, mud flying, shouts erupted, whips cracked, dogs barked. The overseers gave chase, their boots thundering, their voices filled with rage. Amari froze, his heart hammering. At him to move, to run with Mateo, to seize that fleeting chance. But his legs would not obey. Fear wrapped around him like chains. He could only watch Mateo reach the edge of the field, the jungle rising before him like a wall of green freedom. For a moment, it seemed he might make it. For a moment, the dream lived. Then the gunshot tore the air. Mateo's body jerked. He fell into the mud, arms outstretched toward the trees. The overseers closed in, dragging him back by his legs. Face was slack, his eyes staring upward at the sky. The slaves were forced to gather, their work halted. Valverde himself appeared, his fine coat spotless, his boots polished despite the mud. He looked down at Mateo's body with cold disgust. "Let this be a lesson," he declared, his voice sharp as steel. "There is no escape. You belong here until death takes you." The overseers left Mateo's corpse in the dirt for all to see. The slaves were ordered back to work. Each step a march through grief and rage. Amari bent under his load, tears blurring his vision. The weight felt endless, crushing not only his body but his spirit. Yet beneath the sorrow, something hardened. Within him, as the day dragged on, he thought of the river, of its silence, of its promise. He thought of the song Alina hummed in the nights, carrying fragments of defiance. He thought of Mateo's last run, reckless and doomed, yet filled with courage. When the sun set, the overseers dragged Mateo's body away. But in Amari's heart, his friend had not died in chains. He had died reaching, running, refusing. That night, as the barracks sank into silence, Amari whispered to the darkness, "They can break the flesh. They can chain the hands. But they will never kill what's inside." The others heard him. No one spoke, but the words settled into them. Like embers waiting for flame, the dawn would come again, with lashes, with chains, with endless toil. But somewhere in that silence, in that river, in that memory of Mateo's last sprint, lived the promise that not all chains would last forever, and Amari carried that promise in his heart, unbroken.